My name is Olivia Bennett, and I was 35 years old when I realized the most dangerous lies aren't the dramatic ones. They're the calm, ordinary lies spoken with a smile. For 2.5 years, I believed I was building a future with a man who respected me. Instead, I was unknowingly becoming the backup plan while he quietly rebuilt his past. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment everything started changing. At the time, though, I kept telling myself I was imagining things. My boyfriend Ethan Carter and I had met at a mutual friend's birthday party. We bonded over weekend hiking trips, terrible reality television, and the kind of conversations that stretched late into the night because neither of us wanted them to end. He made me laugh. He made me feel safe. For a long time, I honestly believed we brought out the best in each other. We talked about buying a home together someday. We browsed neighborhoods online just for fun. Sometimes we'd joke about what color we'd paint the kitchen, or which room would become our future children's bedroom. Those conversations felt real. Or maybe they were only real to me. About 3 months before everything collapsed, subtle cracks began appearing. At first, Ethan simply became quieter. Then came the criticism. It never sounded cruel enough to argue with. It came wrapped inside concern. You could be more ambitious. You avoid confrontation. You don't really take charge. I worked in IT infrastructure. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't flashy. But it was stable, challenging, and paid well. I enjoyed solving problems. I slept peacefully at night, knowing my work mattered. Apparently, that wasn't enough anymore. Soon, another woman entered almost every conversation. Not physically, verbally. His ex-girlfriend, Victoria Hayes. They had dated for 3 years before we met. Every time her name surfaced, Ethan's eyes softened in a way I hadn't noticed before. Victoria always knew exactly what to say. Victoria handled pressure differently. Victoria wasn't afraid of difficult decisions. The comparisons started small. Then they became routine. Eventually, they became impossible to ignore. Every compliment toward her felt like another quiet criticism of me. I laughed them off in the beginning. Then I defended myself. Eventually, I simply stopped responding. That silence became one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. Because every time I accepted another comparison without protest, Ethan learned he could keep making them. 2 weeks before our breakup, everything finally shifted beyond repair. It was a Tuesday. Around 5 in the afternoon, Ethan texted me. Late meeting tonight. Probably won't be home until around 9. Nothing unusual. His company occasionally held evening planning sessions. I replied with a heart emoji. No worries. Have a good meeting. Originally, I planned to have dinner with my best friend Megan. She canceled because her daughter suddenly developed a fever. Instead of eating alone, I had another idea. Ethan loved the green curry from a small Thai restaurant across town. He always ordered the same thing. Extra vegetables, medium spice, no onions. I smiled while placing the order. Relationships weren't supposed to survive because of grand romantic gestures. They survived because someone remembered the small details. I picked up the food and drove toward his office around 7:15. The lobby looked strangely empty. Only the security guard sat behind the reception desk. I smiled politely. Hi. I'm just dropping off dinner for Ethan Carter in corporate sales. He typed for several seconds before looking back at me. I'm sorry. Ethan Carter. Yes. He frowned. There isn't anyone from sales here tonight. I blinked. He told me there was a late meeting. The guard checked again. No scheduled meetings. He looked almost apologetic. Actually, everyone from sales left around 5:30. The hallway behind him was dark. The elevators barely moved. Cleaning crews quietly pushed carts across polished floors. I thanked him, walked back outside, sat inside my car. The warm container of curry rested untouched in the passenger seat. My hands refused to start the engine. Maybe there had been a last-minute location change. Maybe he'd forgotten to tell me. Maybe. I called him. He answered after the 3rd ring. Hey, babe. His voice sounded relaxed. Behind him I heard music, glasses clinking, people laughing. Definitely not a conference room. Just checking in, I said casually. How's the meeting? A tiny pause. Oh, it's fine. Another laugh echoed somewhere behind him. Kind of boring. When do you think you'll finish? Probably another hour. You should eat something. We're ordering food here. Another lie. So don't wait up. Okay, I whispered. Good luck. We ended the call. I stared at my reflection in the windshield. The Thai food suddenly smelled cold. I drove home without remembering a single traffic light. When Ethan finally came home around 9:30, he looked surprisingly cheerful. He tossed his keys into the bowl by the front door. Killer meeting, he sighed dramatically. I'm exhausted. He slipped off his shoes, loosened his tie, walked toward the bedroom. How'd it go? I asked from the kitchen. He didn't hesitate. Quarterly planning. Mike wouldn't stop talking. Mike was supposedly his manager. Another lie layered neatly on top of the first one. I wanted to scream. Instead, I simply nodded. That night I barely slept. Every explanation my heart invented collapsed beneath one unavoidable fact. He had lied without hesitation. The following morning I did something I never imagined I'd do. I called his office. His assistant answered. Corporate sales. This is Hannah. Hi, Hannah. This is Olivia, Ethan's girlfriend. Oh, hi. I wanted to surprise him later this week. I was wondering if he has any more late meetings coming up. She happily checked his calendar. No, actually his schedule is pretty quiet. What about Tuesday? Silence. Yesterday. He left around 5:15. No evening meetings. I thanked her. Hung up, sat perfectly still. The room suddenly felt smaller. That evening, Ethan casually announced another late meeting. Almost word for word. I'll probably be home around 10. He kissed my forehead before leaving. I watched him drive away. Then I opened Find My Friends. Months earlier, we'd shared locations for safety during road trips. Neither of us had ever thought much about it afterward. His location wasn't anywhere near his office. Instead, it rested directly on top of one of the city's most expensive steakhouses. I grabbed my keys, drove downtown, parked across the street. My heartbeat echoed louder than passing traffic. At exactly 7:20, the restaurant doors opened. Ethan stepped outside. Beside him walked an elegant blonde woman. Beautiful, confident, familiar from old social media photos. Victoria, his ex-girlfriend. She laughed, touched his arm. He smiled in a way I hadn't seen in months. Then they embraced. Not awkwardly. Not like old friends reconnecting. Comfortably. Like people continuing something that had never really ended. I drove home before he could see me. When he arrived, he smiled as though nothing had happened. The meeting wrapped up early, he said. I'm starving. He opened the refrigerator. I looked at the untouched Thai food, still sitting on the shelf, exactly where I'd left it. Ethan. He turned around. What? Can I ask you something? He shrugged. Sure. Do you think I handle responsibility well? He laughed softly. That's random. I'm just curious. He leaned against the kitchen counter. You handle everyday life fine. But real responsibility? He shook his head. I don't think so. What do you mean? You avoid conflict. You don't lead. You'd never survive real responsibility. The words landed harder than I expected. Then came the sentence that finally broke something inside me. Victoria always knew how to handle situations like this. I took one slow breath. Where were you tonight? His smile disappeared. I told you. Late meeting. There wasn't one. He froze. I called your office. His eyes widened. I checked your location. Silence. I watched you leave Blackstone Steakhouse. More silence. I saw you with Victoria. His face drained of color. Olivia. Is it her? He looked toward the floor. It's not what you think. How long? We've just been talking. How long? About 6 weeks. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of lies. 6 weeks of comparisons. 6 weeks of making me feel smaller while making her seem unforgettable. He stepped closer. It isn't serious. I quietly picked up my overnight bag from beside the hallway closet, because somewhere deep inside, I think I'd already known I would need it. I carried the overnight bag to my car without another word. Behind me, Ethan kept talking. Olivia, please don't leave like this. We need to talk. this isn't what it looks like. Funny how people always say that when you've already seen exactly what it looks like. I paused with my hand on the driver's door. What exactly doesn't it look like? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Not because he was hurting, because he genuinely hadn't expected to get caught. There was a difference. I drove straight to my best friend Megan's house. She opened the front door wearing pajamas and took one look at my face before pulling me into a hug. "You don't have to explain tonight," she whispered. "You can just breathe." That single sentence nearly broke me. For weeks, I'd been questioning my own instincts, wondering if I was too sensitive, too emotional, too insecure. Yet the moment someone simply believed me, I realized how lonely I'd felt inside my own relationship. The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. "Ethan, can we please talk?" I ignored it. Another message arrived. I barely slept. Then another. "Please answer." I turned the phone over. Megan placed a mug of coffee beside me. "You don't owe him anything today." She was right. But silence didn't stop the messages. By lunchtime, there were 23. By evening, almost 40. Some apologized. Some blamed stress. Some insisted nothing physical had happened. Others simply begged. Finally, around 9 that night, one message appeared that actually contained the truth. "We've been meeting for about 6 weeks. It never became physical. We just talked." I was confused. I realized I wanted you. I stared at the screen, confused. Such an innocent little word. People hid behind it all the time. Confused enough to lie. Confused enough to invent meetings. Confused enough to compare one woman to another until one of them stopped believing in herself. No, that wasn't confusion. That was choice. I typed exactly 4 words. "Don't contact me tonight." Then I switched my phone off. The following 2 days passed in an emotional fog. Sometimes anger won. Sometimes sadness. Sometimes humiliation. The worst moments weren't remembering the restaurant. They were remembering ordinary evenings. The countless conversations where Ethan had casually mentioned Victoria. You know, Victoria would have negotiated harder. Victoria always understood office politics. I wish you had her confidence. Back then, I'd thought he was offering constructive criticism. Now I understood. He wasn't encouraging me to grow. He was slowly convincing himself he'd chosen the wrong woman. Every comparison had been less about improving me, and more about justifying his return to someone else. That realization hurt more than the lies. On Saturday afternoon, Megan found me sitting on her back porch, staring into the garden. "You've been replaying everything again." "I know. You need closure." "I don't think closure exists." She sat beside me. "What do you want?" I thought carefully before answering. "I don't want revenge." "Good. My voice cracked. "I don't want another woman being lied to the way I was." Megan looked at me for several seconds. Then she asked quietly, "Do you think Victoria knows about you?" The question settled heavily between us. "I don't know. And if she doesn't?" I already knew the answer. She deserved the truth. Not because she was Ethan's former girlfriend, because she was another human being, making decisions based on lies. That evening, I opened my laptop. I searched Ethan's old social media photos until I found Victoria's full name. Victoria Hayes. She worked for a national consulting firm. Her LinkedIn profile appeared almost immediately. Professional, accomplished, confident. Exactly the woman Ethan had spent months telling me I could never become. For a long time, my fingers rested above the keyboard. Angry emails are easy. Truthful ones are much harder. Finally, I began typing. "Victoria, you don't know me. My name is Olivia Bennett. Or at least until 3 days ago. I was Ethan Carter's girlfriend. I'm writing because I believe you deserve accurate information before making any decisions. Ethan has been telling me for months that the two of you simply reconnected professionally. I recently discovered he has actually been meeting you privately while telling me he was working late. I ended our relationship after seeing the two of you together Thursday evening. I don't know what Ethan has told you. I don't know whether you know I existed. If you already knew everything, then please ignore this email. But if you didn't, I thought you deserved the chance to know. There's something else you should probably hear. For months, Ethan constantly compared me to you. He described you as stronger, smarter, better under pressure, more capable. I don't know whether you'd appreciate being used that way. I certainly didn't appreciate hearing it. I'm not asking for anything. I simply believe everyone deserves the truth. Take care. Olivia. I read the message 6 times before pressing send. There were no insults, no accusation, no threats, just facts. When the email disappeared from my outbox, I closed the laptop. A strange calm settled over me. Whatever happened next would no longer depend on me. Monday morning, I returned to my apartment. Ethan had moved most of his belongings out during the weekend while I stayed with Megan. The silence inside the apartment felt unfamiliar. Not empty. Peaceful. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for criticism. I wasn't wondering whether I measured up to someone I'd never even met. I was making coffee when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored unknown calls. Something told me not to this time. Hello? A woman's voice answered. Is this Olivia Bennett? Yes. My name is Victoria Hayes. I slowly sat down. I received your email. There was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion. I wasn't sure if you'd call. I almost didn't. A long silence followed. Finally, she spoke again. I think we've both been lied to. Every muscle in my body tightened. What do you mean? Ethan told me the two of you broke up nearly 3 months ago. I closed my eyes. He said you stayed friendly because separating was complicated. My stomach dropped. He said you were already seeing someone else. I whispered. We live together. I know. I found that out this morning. She sounded embarrassed. When your email arrived, I assumed it was fake. So, I called him. He insisted you were a jealous ex. What changed? I asked him for proof. Another silence. He couldn't provide any. He kept changing details. The timeline never matched. I leaned back in my chair. He told me you were only networking. A bitter laugh escaped her. He told me we were rebuilding what we'd lost. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Two strangers, connected by the same deception. I had no idea you still existed in his life, Victoria finally admitted. If I'd known, you wouldn't have gone. No. I would have walked away immediately. For the first time since Thursday night, I believed someone. Not because I wanted to, because nothing in her voice sounded rehearsed. She sounded exactly like I probably sounded. Confused. Embarrassed. Heartbroken. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know I don't owe you an apology because I didn't know. But I'm still sorry. You deserved honesty too. She exhaled slowly. I ended things with him. So that's it. No second chances. She laughed sadly. If someone can lie this convincingly to 2 women at the same time, what exactly would I be saving? I smiled, despite everything. That's probably the healthiest thing anyone said all week. She chuckled. Then her tone grew serious. Olivia. Yes. I hope someday you stop hearing those comparisons in your head. You aren't competing with me. You never were. Those words hit harder than she probably realized. Because for months, I'd unknowingly been competing against a fantasy Ethan himself had created. He had turned Victoria into an impossible standard. And apparently, he'd been doing exactly the opposite with me, making me smaller so he could justify chasing someone else. We talked another 15 minutes. Not about Ethan, about facts, timelines, conversation. Every new detail exposed another lie. He told Victoria I was emotionally unstable. He told me Victoria only existed in his past. He'd promised each of us completely different futures. When the call finally ended, I sat perfectly still. Outside morning, traffic continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Inside, everything had changed. Because I no longer wondered whether I had overreacted. I knew the truth now. And somewhere across the city, so did the other woman. I looked down at my phone. At 9:14 a.m. It vibrated. Once. Twice. Then again. The screen lit up with Ethan's name. By the time 1 minute had passed, he had already called 12 times. Something had happened. Victoria had spoken to him. And judging by the desperation in those incoming calls, his carefully constructed world had just started collapsing. At 9:17 a.m., my phone began vibrating so violently against the kitchen counter that the coffee in my mug trembled. Ethan. Again. And again. And again. I watched his name appear until the screen finally went dark. Then the messages started. What did you tell her? Olivia, answer me. Victoria just called. She says she's done. What the hell did you say? I stared at the words, without touching the phone. For months, Ethan had controlled every version of the truth. He had decided what I knew, what Victoria knew, what his coworkers knew, what his friends believed. Now, for the first time, two people had compared notes without giving him the chance to stand between them. And suddenly he was terrified. Another message appeared. You had no right to contact her. That one almost made me laugh. No right. The man who had lied to both of us was furious that we had spoken to each other. I set the phone face down and carried my coffee to the window. Outside, people hurried toward offices and buses wrapped in ordinary Monday morning routines. Inside my apartment, the silence felt different. It no longer felt lonely. It felt protected. At 9:31, Ethan left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it. At 9:36, he sent another message. You ruined everything. I finally picked up the phone. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I wrote, I told her the truth. Whatever happened after that was her decision. His reply came immediately. You made me look like a monster. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I typed, No. I stopped helping you look innocent. I blocked his number. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then someone started pounding on the apartment door. Not knocking, pounding. My entire body went rigid. Olivia. Ethan's voice echoed through the hallway. I know you're in there. I had expected anger. I hadn't expected him to arrive so quickly. Fortunately, Megan's brother had helped me change the locks legally over the weekend. Ethan had already moved out voluntarily, and his name had never been on the lease. Still, hearing him outside sent an old instinct through me. The instinct to calm him, to explain, to avoid conflict. Exactly the weakness he had accused me of having. I walked toward the door slowly. Open the door, he demanded. I fastened the chain before turning the lock. When I opened it a few inches, I barely recognized him. His hair was disheveled. His tie hung loose around his neck. His face was red with anger and panic. What do you want? His eyes widened. What do I want? He laughed bitterly. You contacted Victoria. Yes. You destroyed everything. No. His jaw tightened. You don't get to stand there acting innocent. I'm not acting. She ended things because of you. She ended things because she learned the truth. You could have talked to me first. I did. When? Thursday night. He looked away. That wasn't a conversation. You attacked me. I asked where you were. You were emotional. I was calm enough to let you explain. And you didn't believe me. Because you were lying. For a moment, he simply stared at me. Then, his expression changed. The anger softened. His voice dropped. Olivia, please. There it was. The version of Ethan, who appeared whenever rage stopped working. I made mistakes. I said nothing. I was confused. You were organized. His eyebrows pulled together. What? You planned dinners. You invented meetings. You managed 2 separate stories. That isn't confusion, Ethan. That's strategy. He gripped the doorframe. I never wanted to hurt you. You compared me to her for months. I was frustrated. You told her we broke up. I didn't know what I wanted. You knew exactly what you wanted. My voice trembled, but I kept going. You wanted her attention and my loyalty. You wanted the excitement of rebuilding something with Victoria, while keeping the security of coming home to me. His eyes flashed. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You always do this. Do what? Turn everything into some moral judgment. I almost smiled. Even now, he was trying to make my reaction the real problem. You've always thought you were better than me, he said. I never thought that. You act like it. No, Ethan. I leaned closer to the narrow opening. I spent 2.5 years trying to become good enough for you. And somehow the moment I stopped trying, you decided I was arrogant. His face tightened. I loved you. You loved being loved by me. The hallway fell silent. For the first time, he had no immediate response. Then he shook his head. You're vindictive. I sent one email. You knew what would happen. I hoped the truth would happen. She thinks I'm a liar. You are. You turned her against me. She made her own decision. He stepped closer. The chain pulled tight. Open the door. No. Olivia. Leave. We're not finished. Yes, we are. His voice rose again. After everything I did for you. The question was so absurd that I almost asked him to list those sacrifices. Instead, I said quietly, you don't get credit for loving me during the same months you were deceiving me. His face changed again. This time, something colder appeared. You'll regret this. A strange calm passed through me. Maybe. But I already regret staying as long as I did. I closed the door. He shouted my name. Then he knocked again. For several minutes, his voice traveled through the wood. Apologies. Accusation. Promises. Threats disguised as heartbreak. Finally, the hallway went quiet. I stood with my forehead pressed against the door, my hands shaking. I had imagined that confrontation would make me feel powerful. It didn't. It made me feel tired. But beneath the exhaustion was something stronger. Relief. For once I had not softened the truth to make him comfortable. Over the next week, the rest of Ethan's carefully constructed stories began falling apart. Not because I launched some public campaign against him. I didn't post screenshots. I didn't contact his family. I didn't tell his coworkers. I simply answered honestly when mutual friends asked why we had broken up. That was enough. The first call came from our friend, Rachel. She sounded hesitant. Ethan told us you'd been separated for weeks. We weren't. He said you were refusing to accept the breakup. He was still living here. Silence. Then she asked, was Victoria involved? Yes. Rachel exhaled slowly. He told me she was helping him network. Apparently that was the story he had given several friends. To coworkers, Victoria was a professional contact. To certain close friends, she was someone he might date after leaving me. To Victoria, I was already an ex. To me, Victoria was merely a woman from his past. Each lie had been carefully tailored. No one person knew enough to challenge the full picture. Until now. 2 days later, one of Ethan's coworkers messaged me. Herr Name was Danielle. We had met several times at office parties. I'm sorry to bother you, she wrote, but I think Ethan used my name as part of one of his stories. She explained that Ethan had told people he was attending late planning sessions with her department. There had been no such sessions. He had apparently assumed no one would ever compare calendars. By Thursday, his younger sister called me. Her voice was quiet. My parents just found out. I closed my eyes. What did he tell them? That you became controlling. I wasn't surprised. He said you monitored his location, contacted his ex, and locked him out. All of those things happened after I discovered he had been lying for 6 weeks. I know. She hesitated. He left that part out. Of course he had. His family had believed our relationship was healthy. His friends believed he was unhappy and preparing to leave. Victoria believed he was single. Every person had received the version of Ethan that best protected him. And now all those versions were colliding. The strangest conversation came from Victoria. She called me again Friday evening. I thought you should know something, she said. What happened? He's telling people I pursued him. My stomach tightened. He said you kept contacting him. Yes, but I have every message. Her voice sounded less heartbroken now, more angry. He initiated everything. He reached out after the conference. He invited me to dinner. He told me you were already gone. I believed her. Not because we had become friends. We hadn't. But because the pattern was obvious. Whenever Ethan lost control of the narrative, he rewrote himself as the victim. "I'm sorry," I said. She sighed. "I'm not calling because I need you to defend me. I know. I just wanted you to understand. I do." There was a pause. Then she added, "He said terrible things about you." My throat tightened. I assumed he did. He said you were passive, unmotivated, emotionally dependent. I looked across the apartment at the empty place where his shoes used to sit. He said similar things to me. About me. I nodded before remembering she couldn't see me. Yes. He made you sound perfect. Victoria gave a quiet, humorless laugh. He told me you were unstable. He told me you were fearless. He told me you couldn't handle life without him. He told me you handled everything better than I did. Another silence. Then Victoria said something I would remember for years. He didn't love either version of us. He loved controlling the distance between us. The sentence struck something deep inside me. Because she was right. As long as Victoria remained an idealized memory, Ethan could use her to criticize me. As long as I remained a damaged ex in Victoria's mind, he could use me to gain her sympathy. Neither of us had been allowed to exist as real women. We had been turned into tools inside his story. After the call ended, I sat alone in the living room. The apartment was peaceful, but my thoughts were loud. Over the next several days, more people reached out. Some apologized. Others admitted they had noticed how often Ethan criticized me. Rachel said she had always hated the way he corrected me in front of friends. Danielle remembered him laughing at my job because it was too safe. Even Megan confessed she had worried about me for months. Why didn't anyone say something I asked her? She looked ashamed. We didn't want to interfere. I understood. But part of me wished someone had. Not because their warning would have magically saved me, but because I had spent so long believing my discomfort was weakness. Maybe hearing one person say, "That isn't normal," would have helped me trust myself sooner. That night after Megan left, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I looked exhausted. There were shadows beneath my eyes. My face seemed older than it had a week earlier. Yet something about my reflection also looked clearer. For 2.5 years, I had measured myself through Ethan's disappointment. Not decisive enough. Not ambitious enough. Not confident enough. I had slowly abandoned hobbies because he called them distractions. I had stopped seeing certain friends because he said they kept me small. I had mistaken shrinking for compromise. The deepest betrayal wasn't that he had chosen Victoria. It was that I had spent months abandoning myself while waiting for him to choose me. My phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. An email from Ethan. The subject line read, "Please read this before deciding who I am." I stared at it. Then I moved it to a folder without opening it. For the first time, I no longer needed his explanation. I already understood exactly who he had chosen to be. And now I had to decide who I would become without him. I left Ethan's email unopened for 3 days. Not because I was tempted, because I knew the version of me who had loved him would eventually become curious. She would wonder whether his words sounded sincere, whether he finally understood, whether there was one sentence hidden inside that message, capable of making everything hurt less. On the 4th morning, I deleted it without reading a single word. That was the first decision I made entirely for myself. Not to punish him, not to prove strength, but because I finally understood that closure would never come from the person who created the wound. Closure had to begin when I stopped asking him to explain why I hadn't been enough. Because the truth was, I had been enough. I had simply been giving everything to someone who needed me to feel inadequate. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Healing wasn't dramatic. There were no triumphant mornings when I suddenly woke up free of every memory. Some days, I felt strong. Other days I opened a kitchen cabinet and remembered how Ethan used to complain that I arranged the mugs incorrectly. Sometimes I heard his voice inside my own thoughts. Too cautious. Too ordinary. Too weak. Those were the hardest moments. Not missing him. Missing the version of myself who had existed before his criticism became part of my inner voice. So I started rebuilding slowly. I returned to the climbing gym I had abandoned almost a year earlier. Ethan had always called it a waste of money. "You're not even competitive," he used to say. "What's the point?" The first evening back, my hands trembled before I even touched the wall. The gym smelled like chalk and rubber mats. Music echoed across the high ceilings. People laughed after falling. No one seemed embarrassed. I remembered why I had loved being there. Rock climbing wasn't about reaching the top faster than anyone else. It was about trusting yourself enough to move when every instinct told you to stay still. My first route was embarrassingly easy. I slipped twice. My arms burned halfway up, but when I reached the top and touched the final hold, I looked down at the floor and started laughing. Not because I had accomplished something extraordinary, because I had done something Ethan had convinced me no longer mattered, something that belonged only to me. A week later, I joined a recreational soccer league with Megan. I hadn't played since college. At our first game, I missed an easy shot and nearly collided with another player. Instead of criticizing me, everyone laughed. Someone slapped my shoulder and said, "You'll get the next one." The kindness of that simple sentence stayed with me all night. You'll get the next one. No comparison. No insult disguised as motivation. Just encouragement. I began to notice how different life felt when affection wasn't conditional. At work, I volunteered to lead a network migration project I would normally have avoided. Ethan had spent months insisting I lacked leadership. For a few seconds, his voice almost stopped me. Then I raised my hand anyway. The project wasn't easy. There were delays. A vendor made a costly mistake. 2 team members disagreed constantly. But I handled it. Not perfectly. Not fearlessly. I asked for help when I needed it. I made decisions. I admitted when I was wrong. And when the system launched successfully, my manager called me into her office. "You stayed calm under pressure," she said. "You gave people space to do their jobs without losing control of the project." I almost laughed. Ethan had described leadership as dominance, presence, taking charge of every room. My manager described it as steadiness, listening, responsibility. For the first time, I realized Ethan's judgment had never been objective. He had defined strength in whatever way allowed him to find me lacking. About 5 weeks after the breakup, Megan called me during lunch. I heard Ethan requested a transfer. I stopped walking. To where? Another city. Why? She hesitated. Apparently, things became uncomfortable here. I leaned against the side of the office building. Uncomfortable how people stopped believing him. I didn't ask for more details. But Megan continued. She had heard that Ethan's stories about Victoria had caused problems among several coworkers. Not professional misconduct, exactly. More like trust had evaporated. He had used colleagues' names to support fake meetings. He had told different people conflicting stories. When questions started spreading, his carefully polished image cracked. The transfer was technically voluntary. Everyone understood why he had taken it. "I thought you'd want to know," Megan said. "I'm not sure I do. I'm sorry. It's okay." And strangely it was. A month earlier, that news would have felt satisfying. I might have called it justice. Now it only felt distant. Ethan had spent years believing consequences were something other people created for him. Maybe moving away would allow him to keep believing that. Or maybe, for the first time, he would be forced to sit inside a life without anyone left to blame. A few days later, Rachel showed me one of his social media posts. A black and white photograph of an empty highway. The caption read, "Sometimes, healing means escaping people who never understood your heart." I stared at it for several seconds, then handed the phone back. "Are you angry?" Rachel asked. "No. You're not." "I think he needs that version." "What version?" "The one where he escaped." Rachel looked confused. I smiled faintly. If he admitted he ran away because people learned the truth, he'd have to change. She nodded slowly. "And you don't think he will?" "I don't know. But I did know one thing. It was no longer my responsibility to find out." Victoria contacted me once more. It had been nearly 2 months since the email. Her message was brief. "There's a networking event downtown Thursday. I think we're both registered. I didn't want you to feel blindsided if you saw me." I appreciated the warning. For a moment, I considered skipping the event. Then I realized that would mean allowing Ethan's choices to remove another part of my life. So I went. The event was held inside a hotel ballroom, filled with soft music, bright lights, and hundreds of people wearing name tags. I saw Victoria near the refreshments table. She saw me at the same moment. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she walked over. Hey. She looked different from the woman I had watched outside the steakhouse. Not less confident, just more human. She wasn't the flawless standard Ethan had created. She was simply a woman who had also been deceived. How are you? She asked. Better. Me too. There was no dramatic embrace, no instant friendship, no need for either. We had both survived the same story from opposite sides. That created an understanding too complicated for ordinary conversation. Victoria glanced toward the crowded ballroom. Did you ever read his email? I shook my head. He sent me one too. Did you read yours? Yes. What did it say? She smiled without humor. That he loved me, but you manipulated the situation before he could make the right decision. I exhaled. So he blamed me. Partly. Who else? His childhood. Work pressure. Bad timing. Fear of commitment. She paused. Everyone except himself. I laughed softly. Victoria studied me. For what it's worth, contacting me was the right thing. I wondered about that. You didn't destroy anything. I know that now. He told me you did it because you were jealous. Were you? I thought about the question carefully. At first, Victoria nodded. That makes sense. But later I realized I wasn't jealous of you. What were you jealous of? The way he described you. Her expression changed. I thought you were everything I wasn't. She looked down at her drink. He did the same thing to me. With you? Yes. He said you were dependable. Loyal. Someone who always showed up. He said I had never given him that kind of stability. I stared at her. For months, Ethan had used Victoria's confidence to diminish me. At the same time, he had apparently used my reliability to make her feel inadequate. He had taken our best qualities and turned them into weapons against the other woman. He made both of us feel like the wrong choice, I said. Victoria nodded. So we'd work harder to become the right one. The realization settled between us. We had never been rivals. We had been mirrors positioned so Ethan could control what each of us saw. We talked for a few more minutes. Then, someone called Victoria's name from across the room. She smiled politely. I should go. Of course. Before leaving, she turned back. Olivia. Yes. You handled this better than he said you would. I smiled. So did you. Then we walked in opposite directions. No bitterness. No resentment. Just two women finally free from a competition neither of us had agreed to enter. That evening, I returned to my apartment and opened the windows. Warm air moved through the rooms. The place looked different now. I had replaced the dark curtains Ethan preferred with lighter ones. I moved the furniture. I filled the shelves with books he used to call clutter. The apartment no longer felt like the scene of a betrayal. It felt like mine. I made tea and sat on the floor beside the open balcony door. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about the morning everything collapsed. The email, Victoria's call, Ethan's phone ringing over and over. For weeks, people had described what I did as revenge. Even Ethan called it punishment, but revenge would have meant trying to hurt him. I hadn't needed to. All I had done was remove the distance between two people he had been deceiving. The truth handled everything else. That was the lesson I carried forward. Lies survive through separation. They survive when no one compares stories, when each person believes they are the only one confused, the only one doubting themselves, the only one missing something. Ethan's entire world depended on Victoria and me never speaking. One honest email ended that, not because it was cruel, because it was accurate. People sometimes ask whether I regret sending it. I don't. Victoria deserved to know she was being lied to. I deserved confirmation that I wasn't imagining what was happening. Neither of us deserved to make life-changing decisions using information Ethan had manufactured. There is one detail I learned later. The moment from the beginning of this story. The phone call. Victoria told me that when she called Ethan that Monday morning, he answered cheerfully. He thought it was a normal conversation. Then she said, "I received an interesting email from your girlfriend Olivia." According to Victoria, he went completely silent. The call disconnected. She assumed he had hung up, but one of Ethan's co-workers later admitted he had been standing near the break room when the call came. The second Ethan heard my name, his phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor. He stared at it without moving. Not because I had threatened him, not because I had exposed him publicly, because in that moment, he knew two worlds that were never supposed to meet had finally collided. He called Victoria back 2 minutes later. By then, she was already done listening. Sometimes, people imagine consequences arrive loudly, through screaming matches, public humiliation, grand revenge. But sometimes consequences begin with one quiet fact reaching the one person who was never supposed to hear it. I never posted about Ethan. I never contacted his employer. I never tried to destroy his reputation. I told one person the truth. After that, every consequence belonged to him. Ethan once told me I would never survive real responsibility. Maybe he was right about the woman I used to be. The woman who avoided conflict because she was afraid honesty would make someone leave. The woman who mistook criticism for guidance. The woman who kept shrinking so a man would feel larger beside her. She might not have survived. But the woman I became afterward understood something Ethan never did. Real responsibility isn't controlling everyone around you. It's facing the consequences of your own choices. It's telling the truth even when it changes everything. It's walking away from the person you love when staying requires you to abandon yourself. I didn't win Ethan back. I didn't need to. I won back the woman I had been before he convinced me she wasn't enough. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered.